Thank you for watching us on YouTube. But did you know that if you're on the go, you can get the full show as a podcast now? You can get our morning breakdown of the most important topics facing our country, news not being covered by the mainstream media, interviews with change-making progressives, and info on what you can actually do about all this. Search for The Damage Report on your favorite podcast app and subscribe so you know when new episodes are ready to go. But there is a topic that we really need to talk about. I read a story that came out very recently by Ken Klippenstein of TYT Investigates having to do with his work uncovering the restraint devices being used by ICE on detainees, some of which is both degrading and in many cases actually dangerous. And so Ken joins us now on The Damage Report to break down his reporting. Welcome to the show, Ken.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Always glad to have you on. So your story is up on tyt.com, but for those who haven't yet had a chance to read it, could you break down some of the different classifications of restraint devices that you have found out that ICE is using?
So under the Freedom of Information Act, which makes it so that government agencies, at least in principle, have to declassify and release records that they produce internal since taxpayers pay for them. And subject to some exemptions and some rules, release the contents of these documents, I was able to find the entire list, as you say, of the restraint devices that ICE is now authorized to use since September of 2017, the Trump administration, on ICE detainees. And what I found was, I think cause for concern. One of the devices has killed multiple people, or been involved in the deaths of multiple people, I should say. Courts have not yet established responsibility for that, but I still think that's something they should look into. And beyond that, the Justice Department is supposed to have standards for the restraint devices they use to ensure the safety of the detainees and also the quality of them. They don't have any standards for many of the devices that ICE is using. So all of that, I think, was cause for concern.
So I'll follow up to a couple of points there. In terms of the standards, so they do have standards for certain types of restraint devices, but not others. How does that break down?
They don't explain why. I think that some of the implements that ICE is using to detain people are so exotic that the Justice Department, either hasn't been able to keep up with it or they're not used commonly enough for them to review it. That is what I would speculate.
But in any examples of those?
Oh yeah. So one of them is a full body restraint. They call it the wrap. They kind of lock someone into this thing. It almost looks like a straitjacket, so that they can't move any of their limbs. And in one case, someone who was detained in one of them supposedly suffocated, and the coroner ruled it a homicide. That's just one example.
Wow.
And these are the sorts of things that Justice Department is supposed to, ensure doesn't happen by reviewing these kinds of tools that law enforcement uses.
It brings to mind the image of Hannibal Lecter strapped into like a gurney. But these are not necessarily criminals, right? These are detainees, which could be. I mean, we know how broad the net has been cast in terms of gathering people up. So are these being used exclusively on people that are deemed to be dangerous, or are they being used in a fairly widespread fashion?
I would say they're being used widespread. I mean, we've seen descriptions in the press about, so let me list some of the ones that I found. Gang belts, belly chains, transport hoods, oversized leg irons, locking leg weights, things you wrap around their ankles to just sort of weigh them down so they can't move. What we've seen reporting on, unfortunately, the FOIA documents that I obtained do not speak to who they use them on, just that they're authorized to use them in general. But we've seen reports that they've used these shackles on pregnant women. Supposedly, this has resulted in miscarriages. And so, I mean, if you have it on pregnant women, I assume they're not dangerous. I mean, how much can a late stage pregnant person? How much of a threat can someone like that pose? So I would imagine they use them on anyone.
And so I would, if they had standards, I would imagine that whether you use particular devices on pregnant women would probably be a part of it. But is the things that you're talking about that are theoretically dangerous to be used on pregnant women, do they fall under the standardized or no standards category of restraint devices?
No standards.
Okay, well that seems like a really dangerous situation for us to be putting them in.
You could say that again.
And so I want to talk to you about the financing of this. I know that you've gotten information about the different categories and all that. Do you have any idea yet where these are being bought from? I mean, just the fact that their names are things like the Transport Hood with a Z, like it's cereal or something like that. I mean, I imagine somebody's making big money off of these.
Oh yeah, they're making enormous money. These are private contractors, many of them run by former cops themselves or law enforcement individuals that just sort of, saw an opportunity to make some money once they either left the government or went into the private sector or whatever it may be. And then they dole out, taxpayer dollars to these private companies that, we don't have much insight into the research and development of these things, their implementation. So fortunately, we do have some insight into where the money's going because they have to report these things, and that's how I find out about the existence of a lot of them. But yeah, the oversight seems to be pretty minimal. And I just want to point out one other thing. So you said the transport hood, which is literally almost looks like one of the hoods they would put over a detainee in Gitmo. That was developed by a company called Safariland. So there's yeah, it's called Safariland. That's the company. So these things are very fly by night. They don't seem like huge law enforcement. I mean, I can't emphasize enough. These things many of the companies I looked at were run by one person, maybe.
Wow.
These aren't developers that had been in the business for decades. And there was a sort of chilling. You go to their websites and they have pictures of like skulls on. It's a very macho. There's like former special forces people. And I just that raises some flags to me. Like, do we want these sort of kind of scary looking companies deciding the implements that we're going to use to detain many harmless people?
Yeah, wow. And I would like to thank Safariland because if it wasn't already clear enough that they're treating these people like animals, that really like punches the message right there. Right. But thank you, Ken, for doing this investigation. And I'm sure looking in more into who's benefiting from this seems like the exact sort of area where politicians are going to be basically funneling taxpayer money into people that they know and work with. So thank you.
Well, thanks so much for having me on.
Always glad to have you on to break down your work. People can go to tyt.com to see this and the other investigative reporting that you've done. So thank you again, Ken.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching this clip from the Damage Report. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and ring the bell on YouTube to get notifications of our new videos. And of course, you can catch the full Damage Report live every weekday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific on TYT Network on YouTube TV.